I will call this meeting of the Lunenburg Town Council to order. It is 6 p.m. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I'd also like to note that we've received regrets from Councillor Duggan, who is not feeling well for this meeting. And with that, I will look for a motion to approve the agenda, but staff have requested a late breaking amendment to add an in-camera item related to the acquisition, sale, or lease of municipal properties. So if everyone's okay with that amendment, can I get a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Birtles, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Is there any discussion, debate, additions, deletions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Takes us on to the approval of the meeting minutes from the April 11th meeting. Can I get a motion to approve those as circulated? Moved by Councillor Ernst, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Any errors or omissions to note? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. There are no public hearings, presentations, or questions. That takes us on to correspondence, petitions, and proclamations consideration. There is a proclamation request and flag raising for the VON. There's a draft motion provided. If anyone would be so inclined to move that. Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by Councillor Ernst. Is there any discussion or debate on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. There's no unfinished business, nor committee meeting minutes, recommendations, reports, and notices of motion. That takes us on to new business, and the first item of new business is a very good one, which is the Civic Volunteer Appreciation presentation. So we begin tonight's meeting with a special presentation of the 2023 Civic Volunteer Appreciation Recognition. The town of Lunenburg salutes the hundreds of volunteers who give their time and talents to so many groups and organizations in town. Your significant contributions help enhance our quality of life, and we are truly grateful. National Volunteer Week in Canada was last week, April 16th to the 22nd. The theme for 2023 is Volunteering Weaves Us Together. This highlights the importance of volunteering and how it contributes to the strength and vibrancy of our communities by the interconnected actions we take to support one another. Sharing our time, talent, energy strengthens the fabric of our community. During National Volunteer Week, we celebrated our collective impact. Through our kindness, generosity, and commitment to volunteering, we weave our lives together. This year, we are honored to recognize Huey Corkum, Dave Robb, Travis Vaughn, and Jamie Ernst. Lunenburg wouldn't be Lunenburg without the work of these and other dedicated volunteers. I'm going to make my way up to the riser, and I'm going to ask those volunteers who are receiving presentations to make their way up there when their name is called. And Trevor will offer a "This is Your Lifestyle" biography as you make your way up.
Thank you, Your Worship. Hugh Corkum was our first recipient. Posthumous recognition will be accepted by Roxy Smith on behalf of Hugh's family. Roxy, please come forward. Hugh passed away in 2021. He was a member of the Lunenburg Academy Foundation and enjoyed sharing his collections relating to historic Lunenburg, the Blue Nose, and his stamps. Hugh restored the original historic classroom, which was located on the 3rd floor of Lunenburg Academy, and was the inspiration behind the newly opened Heritage Interpretive Classroom in room 104. The foundation is forever grateful for Hugh's commitment and dedication to service. He was also a faithful member of St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church as a choir member and was active in many other volunteer and community activities. Thank you, Hugh. Dave Robb, please come forward. Dave spends over 200 hours each year with the Lunenburg and District Fire Department, not only responding to calls, but organizing training. Dave has volunteered with the department for over 16 years and as the deputy fire chief for the last 10 years. He is always willing to help out whenever called upon. Dave is also the co-founder of the Nova Scotia Firefighter Benevolent Fund, which provides financial aid to families of sick firefighters. Thank you, Dave.
Okay. Half of the community, just a token of our appreciation.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know if I'm supposed to make a speech like Ross. I don't hear it.
Speech of your life.
Yeah.
Roxy's always a tough act to follow.
The only thing I would say, I'm very proud to be part of the Lunenburg Fire Department. The membership down there is exceptional and volunteer.
Travis Spawn, please come forward. Travis has volunteered with the South Shore Minor Hockey Association for over 10 years in many different roles. He is most active as ice coordinator, spending long days scheduling teams practices, games, and tournaments. Travis has also scheduled ice time for the female Western Riptides and attends many late night meetings for various subgroups within minor hockey. Travis is always willing to lend a hand to all other volunteers within the organization. Travis is a valued community member who believes in fairness, inclusion, and respect within youth sport. Thank you, Travis.
Thank you.
Oh,
yeah. Huge one, right? On behalf of South Shore Minor Hockey, I'd like to thank the town of Lunenburg for always being supportive. Kelly and her staff have been fantastic over the past 10 years as well. And yeah, it's a great honor. Thank you all.
And lastly, Jamie Ernst, please come forward. Jamie has been selected as the Town of Lunenburg's 2023 Provincial Volunteer Award representative. Jamie has volunteered with the Health Services Foundation of the South Shore for almost 20 years as the treasurer of the foundation's board and chair of the finance committee for 8 years. Jamie has been involved with the Gift from the Heart Radiothon since its inception 13 years ago, eventually assuming the role of the Radiothon chair in 2015. This role has helped to shape the Radiothon, raising more than $1.5 million in 13 years. Jamie has also volunteered as the clerk of session at Central United Church for the past 15 years and 2 terms as Central's chair of the official board. He serves as the treasurer of the Lunenburg Academy Foundation, Lunenburg Swimming Pool Society, and the Lunenburg Foundation for the Arts. Jamie was also a faithful volunteer at Lunenburg High School, the Academy, and Blue Nose Academy. Jamie will be honored at the Provincial Volunteer Awards in September. Thank you, Jamie.
Okay, now I have the plaque.
So those that know me know I'm always lost for words. On behalf of the folks that have volunteered through the pandemic, I represent you because it's been hard. Also, I guess one of the things I'm looking forward to is continuing volunteering. I'm waiting for someone to someday ask me to be the secretary because one of the things about my profession is I guess you get asked to be the treasurer more often than not. So I'm kind of jealous of the secretary. So finally, I do want to say thank you to the Health Services Foundation of the South Shore who did nominate me for this process. Unbeknownst to me, I received a very surprised phone call from the mayor one day to tell me all about this process. So they've been a joy to work with, and I look forward to continuing with them. So thank you.
The mayor and council extend their sincere gratitude and appreciation to all our community volunteers and organizations. Thank you to all our volunteers for the important work that you do.
Thank you, everyone. All right, that takes us on to the next presentation, which is the Electric Utility Financial Evaluation and Sustainability Assessment of Future Options from SEMA Canada Incorporated and BDR. I believe they are online with us. if I'm
Yeah,
not
she'll,
mistaken.
in my transition from announcer to AV person, give me one moment and I will add them to the meeting.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair. And I believe the CAO wants to do a bit of an introduction.
I do, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. And members of council, thank you for allowing me to speak a bit on this next item before you. As you just heard, the sustainability of the Lunenburg electric utility operations. In May of 2022, Mayor and Council directed staff to release a request for proposal, or an RFP. The RFP for sustainability report that addresses the current challenges facing the Lunenburg electric utility. Considering the upcoming anniversary of Nova Scotia Power Service Agreement, the town of Lunenburg wishes to evaluate this long-term sustainability of the electric utility and wants to explore the options and collect data to ensure the town can continue to provide reliable electrical infrastructure in a cost-effective manner for the foreseeable future. The possible options that you'll hear about tonight are retaining the ownership and renew the service contract with Nova Scotia Power, retain the ownership and enter into a service contract with another provider, sell the utility, or reestablish our own in-house field staff, also retaining ownership. The town received proposals from 5 firms. Staff reviewed and ranked these submissions, and the top-ranked consultant was SEMA, who you'll hear from just momentarily. This project is part of the Servicing and Facilities Strategic Direction of the town's comprehensive community plan, a town where long-term infrastructure needs of the community are met through strategic management and incremental, well-phased upgrades that are financially sustainable. There are a number of considerations for each path, including costs and risks of each, such as continuing on with aging infrastructure, the changing electrical regulations in Nova Scotia, and climate change impacts as a result of the increasing number and intensities of storms, which lead to more outages. The benefits for the town citizens of all options will also be equally considered moving forward. As this process moves further along, the town will update and engage customers, commercial and residential, as well as the citizens of the town, to help inform any final decisions that will be made. Staff will bring forward a report to a future council meeting, which will weigh each option for council's consideration for decision. This will include financial impacts. What we do know is that if the decision to retain ownership of the utility, there's a capital contribution that will be required, as well as operational costs with staff to ensure the utility functions well. This is not a nice to fix, but more so a must fix position that we're in. One could argue that we can control our own destiny when it comes to cost and risk, but if the decision is to sell, the capital cost and subsequent management of staff and infrastructure would be the responsibility of that next purchaser. I want to note that this is the beginning of this process to gather information and share options. It's for information only. We're not here to make a decision, discuss the options this evening. What it is an opportunity for council to ask questions of the consultant who prepared the report. This is also a responsible and appropriate measure to take to ensure proper due diligence is conducted before making any decisions. As this is a review and information is shared, paramount that a stable, reliable supply of electricity is at the forefront. Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. I now turn it over to the consultants for their presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I'd like to thank the mayor, your worship, members of council, members of the public for allowing us to present this report to council and the public. At this time, we'll do introductions. My name is Darren Lamont. I'm the senior engineer here at SEMA Engineering. On the call also, we have Paula Zarnett, who's the president of BDR. And we also have Trent Winston, who is a member of BDR also, and a consultant that worked on us with this report. With that being said, if we can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. So I'll just go through quick on what we're going to talk about tonight. Introduction of ourselves, the Lunenburg Electric Utilities, the current situation. Option 1, sale of the LEU. Option 2, retain ownership and renew NSPI service contract. Option 3, retain ownership and reestablish in-house field staff. Number 6, comparison of options. Number 7, other considerations, and a summary. With that being said, we'll give maybe a quick background on myself. I come from the utility business. I have previously worked 10 years at New Brunswick Power, 22 years at St. John Energy, and I came over to SEMA 3 years ago, and fully involved with the electric utility, energy resource, renewables, and substation and utility work for my role at SEMA. Maybe Paula, you can do a little quick introduction, then we'll turn it over to Trent, then I'll get into the meat of the report.
Okay, my name is Paula Zarnett. I come from a background of about 20 years working for various utilities, including 14 years as responsible for rates and various kinds of customer programs at Toronto Hydro, which at that time was the largest municipal utility in Ontario, and became a consultant in 1998. First assignment was to help 7 small utilities in Ontario that were interested in selling themselves as a group to a purchaser. And since then, our consulting team has done numerous types of assignments of that sort for utility clients, or conversely for parties that were interested in buying such utilities, and also for groups of utilities or pairs of utilities that were interested in merging or collaborating together on some basis in order to improve their operations and serve their customers better. Trent?
Hello, my name is Trent Winston. I've got about over 25 years of experience in the energy and utility sector, primarily in rates and regulatory affairs. I started off at Enbridge Gas, spent about 5 years there, and then the next over 20 years now in consulting. I've done international work. I've worked with Paula now for, I guess, about 20 years as well.
Thanks, Trent. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Next slide, the introduction. SEMA and BDR, we were retained by the town to prepare an independent report. Part of that, that report provides a comparative assessment of the sustainability risks and potential impact on customer rates under different potential paths forwards regarding the future ownership and operation of the town of Lunenburg Electric Utility. We can move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, within this report, there were 3 alternatives that we reviewed. One was a sale of the utility to NSPI or another third party. Number 2 was the retain ownership and renew the service contract with NSPI or another service provider. And number 3 was to reestablish the town's in-house field staff and keep the utility under the town of Lunenburg. Next slide, please. I believe Paula.
Sure. So we started with analysis of the current situation through documents and also extensive discussion with the town staff who are directly involved in managing and making decisions for LEU. At the end of 2022, there was a net asset base of plant related directly to the utility of $3.2 million and only $500,000 of related debt. By comparison, typically a utility in Ontario has about 60% of its utility plant funded by debt. And the point of that is just to mention that there is borrowing room here if it was necessary to do so. Current revenues just about cover the costs, but they're not enough at present to fund future investments in the plant. So LEU would need to apply for rate increases to the UARB in order to fund those, and also the routine cost increases that are happening. In terms of how this is jumping around all over the place. In terms of how the utility is managed and run, the work on the distribution system, basically in the field, is contracted out to Nova Scotia Power, and the inside work, the management, the administration, the customer service side, invoices and so on, are done by staff who also do work in other parts of the functioning of the town. And that type of sharing of services is very common among smaller municipal utilities and helps both the town functions and the utility functions recruit qualified staff at reasonable cost. So some of the challenges that are ahead, primarily the biggest challenge is that parts of the distribution system are now old. They are, in many instances, no longer consistent with the standard of what a utility is building. This leads to potential of higher risks of outages as those components of the system begin to fail or are damaged in storms. Because they are older, that's going to impose increases in cost for operating and maintaining. And because many of them are no longer standard, just the same as if you have old technology in pretty much anything, you can no longer find replacement parts easily or at reasonable cost. And it's harder and more complex to sustain that. So based on a study that was already done and the expertise of Darren, we're confident that about $15 million will be required to gradually be invested over a period of about 10 years in order to bring that system up to where it will serve for the long term. And what's important to note is that the owner of LEU will have to make these investments in order to keep serving the customers, whether that owner is the town of Lunenburg or whether somebody else buys it. They will have to make these investments and do the work. Next slide. That's Trent.
All right, thank you, Paula. So I'm just going to describe what we essentially did for each of the three options. So for option one, we estimated what the sale proceeds or fair market value would be if it was decided to sell LEU. So by fair market value, there's a definition that I'm just going to read here. It's the price established in a transaction between an informed and willing buyer and an informed and willing seller. So obviously that's not the situation we're in right now. So we had to come up with a couple of alternative methods. And we came up with two, which are commonly used in mergers and acquisitions and these type of ventures. So the first being a discounted cash flow analysis and the second being a valuation benchmarking. So for the discounted cash flow, we prepared a 20-year forecast of all the cash flows associated with the operation of LEU. So this includes all the capital investments, all the operating and maintenance costs, and all the sales revenues that could be expected over that 20-year period. The valuation was then based on the present value or the sum of those net cash flows in each of those 20 years, plus a terminal value. So that provided a basis of valuation that's highly recognized in the industry. The second approach, valuation benchmarking, this is akin to when you buy and sell a house. The first thing you will do is look at market comparable. So a similar neighborhood, a similar type house, what did it sell for? That provides a proxy or an estimate of what your house might sell for. So for this, there was a review of prices established by actual market transactions for other electric utilities. And we use 3 benchmarks, which are commonly recognized: regulated rate base, net book value, and earnings multiple. So just by way of a simple example, what we would do here is if utility sold at some point in time, we would look at what the sale price was and divide it by the book value of that utility. And if it was a value of 10, we could then apply that 10 multiple of 10 to the book value of LEU to come up with a valuation. So in essence, in a nutshell, that's what was done for that process. Okay, next slide, please. So on this slide is where we present the results of the discounted cash flow and the benchmarking analysis. It has been redacted, as you can tell. Just to draw your attention to the comment at the bottom, which is just a caution. If the town does elect to sell, it should be aware that actual purchase offers may vary considerably over time and also between prospective bidders. So while we do all this analysis, there's no guarantee on what you're going to get. It could be better, it could be worse. Next slide, please. For option 2, retain ownership and renew the NSPI service contract, we did an evaluation of the service contract, and it was found that NSPI is providing satisfactory service. However, there was 2 comments or criticisms. Not all service orders are completed within NSPI's level of service times. And secondly, the contract is administratively burdensome to manage, particularly around communications between LEU and NSPI for weekly power technician work schedules and project status meetings. From a financial perspective, it was found that the contract cost is reasonable. LEU's costs are higher than average, but are within a reasonable range based on the comparisons with other utilities that we found. And for the short term, it is prudent for LEU to extend the contract through at least May 31st, 2024. Our recommendations are to hire an electrical engineer, potentially a retiree, or an engineering firm with utility experience to assist with the management of the contract and to research alternative suppliers for sharing of resources with other utilities, and also to pursue alternative arrangements if current service levels can be acquired at a cost savings. Next slide, please. So the third option is again to retain ownership, but to reestablish in-house field staff as opposed to continuing with the NSPI service contract. For this option, there would be a significant capital investment required to purchase a new utility bucket truck, a service vehicle, tools, and associated equipment, along with the materials needed to complete the distribution utility work. It would also be necessary to hire potentially 5 staff and also train them. And it was noted that this would likely exceed the cost of the service contract with NSPI. Our conclusions are this alternative is achievable over time, but would need to ensure the system upgrades and capital investments can be completed under the terms of the NSPI contract using a combination of LEU and NSPI staff. So in effect, just the transition, as you transition from the current situation with the NSPI service contract to when your own staff is fully operational. The town should also investigate any potential synergies or cost savings opportunities with neighboring towns and communities. Next slide, please. And with that, I will pass it over to Darren, I believe. Or Paula, sorry, Paula.
Okay. So these next couple of tables summarize the options in, I guess, both the financial and non-financial aspects, because these decisions are not always 100% about the money. So comparing NSPI versus an in-house workforce, one dimension, of course, is how well is the work being done? And with that, there are, I guess, three possible scenarios. One is normal day-to-day considerations. One is there are storms or other significant events on NSPI's system, but not LEU's. And the third is there are significant events everywhere. So what happens? We've determined that under normal conditions with NSPI, service is satisfactory. With your own workforce, you are in control of the level of service. So it could potentially be better at some cost. And in any case, the focus of your own workforce would always be on work within LEU, whereas an NSPI team is dividing its time and has its resources allocated between LEU and its work serving Nova Scotia Power customers. If there is a storm event affecting NSPI service territory, the result could be that the workforce that normally does work for LEU would be sent off to restore service for Nova Scotia Power customers and would not be available then to do routine work in LEU. If you have your own workforce, they're always focused on work in LEU. If there are storm effects everywhere, then the risk is that LEU's workforce could be overwhelmed by the requirements, and for that, it would be necessary to have access to contract resources or an agreement with Nova Scotia Power that they would help with that restoration when necessary. Administratively, the contract is difficult to administer, and particularly given that the staff who are administering it are not engineers. This is not their core expertise. So either way, the administrative flow needs improvement, working with NSP if that continues. If you have your own workforce, administration is whatever the town decides it will be. In terms of cost, this is where the contract has an advantage. It is a prudent level, and the contract determines what it is. You know what you're getting in advance. With your own workforce, it can be unknown and vary significantly over time as various events take place. Availability, NSP has a big workforce that they can assign to fulfill the contract. With your own workforce, you need to be responsible to recruit them, to retain them, to train them, and make sure that pay and conditions of work are competitive. And it can be challenging for a small utility to attract those kinds of skills. In terms of planning, under the present situation, your own dedicated people are always going to think more long-term and be more focused on the future implications of decisions and efforts than a contractor, regardless of who they are. And for that reason, if the contract is maintained over time, we recommend that the town have a qualified person who understands distribution system planning and design, oversee the contract, and direct the planning of projects related to the distribution system over time. Next slide, please. So this is retain versus sell on the assumption that what we just discussed applies to the retain, and that if LEU is sold, the issue of the contract or the own workforce becomes irrelevant. The buyer will make those decisions. So financially, we did provide, based on our analysis of value, that those assets that business will have if you keep it. If it's sold, of course, instead of LEU, the town would then have cash, which could be saved or deployed to other purposes. The town also receives, under the current situation, a benefit from sharing the staff. There is a number has been quantified for that, and I'll just say that it is significant at the scale that we're talking about. If LEU is sold, that stops happening. The town staff are no longer shared with the work of the distribution system and funded by that. Business risks, we all make our personal decisions as to whether we would like to have the business or we would like to be employees. And that's risk appetite. Having a business has the potential to become richer, but it also has risks that it may not work out, and there are many risks to business ownership. So by continuing with LEU, the town has risks and obligations as a business owner. If LEU is sold, there are no business risks after that. Business opportunity, in our experience in working with many utilities, including municipal utilities, they look at other opportunities than just providing electricity through the distribution system in order to make money. Some of them invest in various types of renewable generation. They may have appliance rental programs. They may provide different expertise that they've acquired to other users for revenue. The town could choose to diversify LEU into some of these opportunities if they continue to own it. Those opportunities are not necessarily ended if LEU is sold. The town could still participate in a renewable generation project and so on. But in our experience, once a town no longer has its utility, the interest in those things tends to go away. There's no longer the same level of contact with the industry or with the customers, and it's basically closed down. In terms of rates, and as a community, as a town that cares about the people who live here. The effects on customers in terms of what they pay is an important decision criterion. We looked through our model 20 years out, and of course, a 20-year forecast is always very uncertain. Our modeling shows rates increasing, whether both for Nova Scotia Power electricity customers and for LEU customers, new investments and costs of every kind increasing. But our model indicates that even considering the amount of investment, $15 million over time, that LEU could continue to offer rates that are below NSPI's rates for a domestic customer over the time frame that we analyzed. If LEU is sold to Nova Scotia Power, our best guess is that the rates that apply to other Nova Scotia Power customers will apply to customers in Lunenburg. If there's another purchaser, all bets are off. They will have their own costs of providing service. Probably they'll do everything possible to stay below Nova Scotia Power, but it is uncertain, and the UARB would approve those rates based on the cost of the provider that's actually there. And generally in the community today, you have a service that's branded in terms of the town of Lunenburg. It provides local service. The town has control over LEU and its strategy and all these benefits, and if you sell that. Next slide, please. So we looked at considerations to, I guess, help focus the idea of what should be thought about, including the money and including things that are not necessarily about the money. So from the perspective of the town staff, of town council, the financial situation, and particularly if LEU is sold, how much money will there be, what will it be used for, and the potential use of the money is a very important for our prior clients. They were thinking a lot about what would the proceeds of the sale be used for if it was sold. Whether the town as the owner of a business is comfortable with being an owner of a business and the risk that entails, whether the town is interested in having additional businesses, taking the risk of those in order to earn additional income that would, of course, be applied to benefits in the community and offset local taxes. And the final one is who can you work with in order to create opportunities to reduce costs or improve service. And there are always multiple good opportunities if you have relationships. From the standpoint of the community, how people in the community feel about LEU as a provider of electricity services versus what their thoughts are about the potential buyer, and whether people in the community have pride in their local service provider and a desire to be served by their neighbors and people that they know. Next slide, please. And from the perspective of of people as customers. They will be concerned about rates and the service quality that they get. As we talked about, we believe it's likely that LEU could continue to serve at rates that are below or close to NSP over time. There are risks to that, unknowns in terms of both LEUs and the comparable Nova Scotia Power rates. But as we look out broadly at municipal electric utilities in Canada and also in the US, municipal utilities tend to be able to offer good rates to their customers. First of all, if they're in a municipality as opposed to in rural areas where customers live closer together, that helps reduce costs of providing service on a distribution system. Municipalities don't have to pay income tax, which an investor-owned utility like Nova Scotia Power does have to pay, and those are, where they're payable, are an additional cost that customers have to pay for in the rates. And service quality, if the town retains LEU, the town has control to adjust the service quality to meet the desires of local customers. Next slide, please. So these two slides briefly touch on, depending on which direction council chooses to go, there are some logical next steps. If to sell, we recommend reaching out to multiple buyers, the same as if you had a house or a car to sell, you'd want a few offers so that you have a chance to take the best one and know what the market is before you commit to sell. We've identified some companies that we think might be interested in talking. It's hard to tell. It's just there would have to be a conversation in order to know whether the time and the situation are right for them. But it is worth the time to try to get multiple bids so you have a basis of comparison. And just with this, the same as if you have any asset to offer for sale, you put it out there, you get offers. If you don't like them, you can always say no to all of them and go back to retaining. Next slide. If the initial decision is to retain it, then the focus of attention needs to be on how to build and operate the utility in the best manner in the immediate future. So 3 steps in that. Because we modeled the financial investments, that $15 million in system renewal and expansion over 10 years, that's a basis to be able to look at when money is needed and where it'll come from. Combination of rate increases, of borrowing, of efficient operations to fund internally, and how that financial plan will work. So that's the first bullet. The second is to work with possible allies to see what can be made more efficient, what costs can be reduced in terms of costs of purchase power in order to keep the rates down to customers. And third, as we've mentioned a couple of times, to get a qualified resource who understands the planning and design of distribution systems to be in charge of the capital plan, the investments, and the work on the system, and to manage contracts, including the NSPI contract. And in the flip side, if a decision is made to proceed on that plan now, and in a year or 2 or 5, you change your mind and decide it isn't meeting your objectives, there's always the possibility then to revisit the sale option. And I'll turn it over to Darren.
Thanks, Paula, for the update. And one thing I'd like to mention, you know, when we reviewed all the documentation provided by LEU, there were a few engineering reports that were done by some engineering firms over the past few years. And there is a significant amount of capital investment that is required to be, you know, fueled into the system. And the reason behind this is there's a few circuits within the town that have a non-standard voltage, and a special equipment's required to be ordered. And since COVID, you know, the lead times are dramatic, but even for that infrastructure, that special infrastructure, it's even longer because you're not ordering many widgets, you're ordering a very few. And either way, at the end of the day, you know, if it is sold, a company will have to do that investment. It's just a matter of when they do it. And by doing these capital investments, it allows the town to grow and expand. You know, you could have future requirements for the town for industrial or commercial loads further out at the extremities of the town. And currently the system, there's limits on the system, what can be added, what can be done. And that also applies for, you know, renewable projects such as solar or batteries or whatever that can be added to the system, you know, due to the non-standard voltages and the older equipment. It's just harder to maintain prices, maintain that pieces of equipment. And that was outlined in some of the reports from NS Power also, and some of the other reports from the other consultants. But in saying this, I guess I got 3 or 4 slides left, and it's basically a summary of what we talked about, but we'll go down that path right now, then we'll be open for if there's any questions. But the first decision for the town is either to sell or retain the LEU. And that decision will depend on unique circumstances. You know, is there a need for potential use of the sale proceeds? What are the risks of operating the LEU, including implementation of the capital investment plan, customer rate impacts, and the community? Those all have big impacts on, you know, if the utility is sold. What does that do for the community? What limits come in place? There could be potential limits of, you know, for community solar or renewables, and the town has to, just another step in maybe the regulatory regime or approval process that has to be done in order to allow the town to grow and develop. If it is decided to sell the LEU, you know, like Paula mentioned earlier, conduct an auction process, you know, to obtain multiple competitive bids to ensure you get the best combination of sale price and customer guarantees. And at the end of the day, if it is sold, it's all what's, you know, written in the contract. You know, successful contract negotiations will enable you, you know, if that is the decision, to maybe determine what the outcome is of the LEU. Next slide, please. So again, this is to retain the LEU. You know, implement the capital investment plan. It's a large number. There's a hump in the middle, and to get over that hump, to get some key infrastructure in, and it's also going to help with, you know, as we talked about, reliability, storms, the growth of the town, an increase in load, bringing more industrial load, commercial load, and residentials into that area. That'll allow that to happen very easily. As we mentioned, it's important to have a utility engineer, a retiree, or a consultant to help execute the plan. You know, there's a lot of pressure on current town staff, and this will help enable the town staff to ensure that the projects get delivered on time and on budget. Presently, there's a 69 kV transmission line that serves Highliner Seafoods, which is an NS Power customer. One of the recommendations would be, you know, can you transfer that ownership back to NS Power? There has been a project on the books that the NS Power suggested. There's a $1.5 million capital investment that's needed to upgrade that line. And presently, you know, this would eliminate 1.4 million from the capital investment plan and would turn into lower LEU customer rates. You know, there is a current benefit that the town does receive a little bit from by owning that, but it's insignificant compared to the capital outlay that would be required to upgrade that line. Pursue shared service arrangements with neighboring municipalities, utilities. There's a group that's next, I think, on left on the borders on to the town of Lunenburg, which is you know, help Mahone Bay, Berwick, and Riverport. Those communities there's a group called Area who helps you know, run those electric utilities for those towns. That could be a sharing opportunity there if the such decision is to retain, and there could be some synergies and sharing of services with them. Next slide, please. This next slide is the retain, but with the two options, you know, continue with the NS Power contract or use of in-house staff. You know, do you renew the service contract? Presently, it's recommended, yes, renew that until at least next May, and then the town can decide on what route they're going to go. You know, there are other service providers out there, but currently NS Power provides a significant amount of service to the town, such as meter reading, capital work, new work orders, upgrades, and trouble calls. So that would have to be looked after if that gets pulled away. And reestablish in-house field staff and share resources. You know, that's another capital outlay, but again, looking at neighboring communities, there could be some synergies to work with those neighboring utilities and municipalities. The town should continue with the service contract in the short term. You know, monitor the level of satisfaction with NS Power Services contract. And if you did happen to hire a retiree or an outside agency, that responsibility can be transferred to them with working to the town and ensure they can ask the questions and ensure the level of service that is retained by the town and the LEU is satisfactory and above satisfactory. Investigate hiring in-house staff and or alternative shared service arrangements with other municipalities, as we mentioned. Those are the multitude of options that we have outlaid in the report in this presentation. And again, it's there are decisions to be made on behalf of the town, and they don't come easy. And you know, with that saying, I think we can go to the next slide. I think that's the end of the slide presentation, I believe, at this point in time. And it becomes, you know, overall a decision of council, you know, with a recommendation from the town on the next steps on where to proceed and what path to follow. But in saying that, you know, we'll open the floor for maybe some potential questions that we can ask. Otherwise, we'll divert them back through to, you know, town staff. So with that, we'll open the floor. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I will open the floor to councillors for their questions. How did I know the deputy mayor would be first? And I'll start a speakers list. So if anybody wants to ask, just motion toward me.
Thank you, Your Worship. One question I have is that you seem to be very confident that, you know, by retaining ownership, we can give a lower rate to our customer base than NSPI. But yet you said the risk of selling the utility to another provider is that they can't guarantee that they can keep the risk, that the rates below NSPI. So why would a firm with, you know, all the available expertise not be able to do it, and where we're in-house and we really don't have the expertise can do it?
I can maybe start that, and then Paula can maybe take off. Sometime it's based on customer density, how there's other utilities in Atlantic Canada, and I can give some examples. In New Brunswick, NB Power serves a few municipalities outside of their that they feed wholesale rates into them, and those jurisdictions are able to keep rates low based on the customer density. The customer, they don't have to feed out in rural areas, so rates can be kept at a relative level that they're still unable to fund and provide money into their capital infrastructure, keep the rates low. One of the things we did hit on too, if it is sold, well, part ownership, you could negotiate, potentially not to increase rates after so many years, but there's some point in time that the rates are going to ramp up and be equivalent to or greater than the current the NSPI at this point in time. They may not exceed NSPI unless they get regulatory approval, but generally the regulators, they're okay with it if the rates are equivalent or below. It's when they get up above where it can become an issue. And I just know from my experience working where I worked in other utilities, we were able to keep rates below the provincial provider based on customer density and how the rates are structured, how the rates become structured on the residential, commercial, industrial side. Sometimes industrials are a pass-through, but with that, maybe if Paula wants to chime in, and I think I've answered your question, I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll have a go. What I heard you asking, if I understood the question correctly, is if LEU was purchased by a company other than Nova Scotia Power, why are we uncertain what might happen to the rates? And the answer is that anybody who bids for it, every different company will have a different vision of how they're going to operate it. And that would depend to a large extent on where they're based and whether they have boots on the ground locally in Nova Scotia to give them synergies in that operation. So they might have and they might not. Likely the other bidders would be investor owned, which mean they have to pay taxes, which would then be rolled into the rates. Are not an element that customers pay now. So if somebody else came in and they needed to staff up locally and not have the benefits of sharing those staff with anybody else, and they were paying taxes, it's possible that could push the rates up higher. Now, what you might be able to do when you negotiate with such bidders is to ask, as part of the sale arrangement, some commitment for a certain length of time that they will hold rates to a level, and or that they will guarantee employment to people in the community. You can ask for community benefits or rate benefits from a prospective bidder. But in the long term, once they own it, once they're operating on it, once they are able to go to the UARB and ask for rates that reflect their costs, you have no control anymore. You can intervene, you can state your case to the UARB, but they will be allowed to recover their reasonable costs of serving you.
If I can
Does
just
that help? Sure.
If I can just add to that, the regulator, the UARB, would also have to approve any sale of LEU to another utility. And one of the conditions they're going to want to know is what's going to be the impact on rates. And if it shows that the rates are going to increase, The UARB's role is ultimately to protect the interests of ratepayers, and they may not necessarily approve the sale if they see it as being a large increase, if customers are going to be burdened with a large increase.
I guess what I'm trying to boil down here is that when you describe the utility being kept here with the town, you describe it as a robust, storm hardened, utility. And I want to compare apples with apples. So if we have the ability to do that, and what gives us the ability to do that when there's firms in their, this is their field, why can't they do it better? That's what I guess what I'm getting at. And I'm come at it from the point of, a small business in a large industry. And that's basically what we are. We're a very small component of a very large industry. And that continues to be stressed. And I guess I've lived these stresses ever since I've been in council, because I came on in 2012. We still had our own crews here then. And I think the objective for that council was let's grow our utility. And we explored options like combining with our neighbors, Riverport and Mahone Bay. And that failed largely because we were a union crew and they didn't want to be infiltrated by a union crew. So they didn't, really weren't interested in us. And we were the largest at the time. We had the bigger crew. We could have easily taken over and done some kind of joint venture with them. So that's where I'm struggling with some of the assumptions that you're making here on the retention of the things of the utility. We've already tried, and I'm wondering if why that wasn't fleshed out when you were going through your report. So once again, comparing apples with apples, a robust storm hardened utility, what's it cost to operate that? And yes, we are, we may have a level of density here, but that's the same playing field that a new operator will have as that we do as well. So it's the variables are constant. We know what our customer base is. We know what our geographic area is. So, I think someone could assess quite quickly how much it would cost to operate a utility. So can we be that utility and still be competitive with NSPI?
I think there's room actually for that. If you have a purchaser come in, there's no guarantee that they are going to storm harden your system. That's where we're coming from, that they're not going to provide that investment into the system that needs to be completed. In saying that, though, that could be in the contract, but I would suspect that a purchaser may not want to guarantee that, because they're going to buy the utility for X dollars and also going to guarantee they're going to dump X million dollars in the utility to make it take it to above where, top notch. But holding the cards in your own hand based on analysis that we have currently completed and based on current situation, the rates, we felt by looking at doing the analysis that the rates still can be held lower than NS Power, but also with the utility being able to do that capital investment that will strengthen the system. That's where we are coming from in part of that report. And that's where we felt, and that was repeated in a few of those reports that were done by other consultants, and the analysis was proven that yes, that is the case. And we know that it takes significant amount of investment to do that, but you have to ensure that someone's responsible for getting that and doing that and getting that investment completed on time. So I'll stop there, Paul or Trent.
Okay, I'm just trying to make sure that I understand where this is going in terms of, I guess, some out of province purchaser coming in here. the probability is that they would not offer to buy LEU unless it was part of a longer term strategy for them to expand their business in Nova Scotia. So they would have a plan in how that fits, and they would know that that their success would depend on being able to offer rates in the long term that are better than Nova Scotia Power's. So they would factor all that into the analysis. But as consultants, and without knowing who that is or what their strategy might be, whether it's joined with expanding service territory or developing renewables, or what their overall business plan is, we can't come in here and say, you can be absolutely assured by us that those rates would be better than what you could offer or what Nova Scotia Power could offer. We can't confidently speak to it. It's too big and it's too diverse.
And I understand. Yeah, that's fair. And it's just that, you know, I read the report and it's sort of, just to me, it's if I just read the report at face value, I would say absolutely keep the utility. Although, like, my experience says not to, because of the risks that we have that's out there, the risks that I know that are out there. You know, the stress it puts on our staff. We have you know, basically our finance staff runs the utility, and you mentioned also that, you know, you certainly recommend, you know, hiring an electrical engineer. That was also attempted to do and grossly failed, and that was in a period of time when the labor market isn't nearly as stressed as it is today. So I'm not sure if that's even a realistic option as well. And I'm wondering, you know, as for a full crew, have you estimated what the operating cost would be for that full crew and what effect that would have on the electrical rates?
Yeah, that is a substantial increase to electrical rates, having, you know, at least 5 staff, some trucks. The other alternative, you know, that's going to be significant capital outlay. But one of the options within that was to retain the utility, keep with Nova Scotia Power, or have another service contractor in place. It's not retain and hire in-house staff. There's another option: retain, keep contract, and or find another service provider to help support the town. But in saying that, both those options were, you know, to hire a consultant or an engineer, and I think they're available. It's just, you know, I guess it comes back to the market, and what's the market prepared to pay, and what is the responsibility of that person or consultant to do. But I think there's still an option. You know, there's 3 options on the table. Like, that's what we indicated: retain, contract as is, or another service provider; retain, have in-house staff, or sell. Those 3 options are still on the table, and you know, I don't think we haven't leaned toward either one of them. We provided options for the town, and that's what we want to do, and that's why we're having this question period, and I encourage that. So hopefully we can answer the questions that council and would want to hear, to provide clear information.
Thank you. That's why I'm trying to drill down here. I'm trying to, you know, get some expert information here that we can make this decision.
In the interest of time, perhaps the deputy mayor will yield the floor. Councillor Halverson, we got some others on the speakers list, and
okay,
we'll come back
could
around to
I
you.
just ask one more question, and then I'll let a little more oxygen into the room.
Since you're going to be chairing meetings from pretty much here on, I'll allow it.
The turning point for me for the utility was when we had the lightning strike, and we had to incur a $2 million borrowing investment in the utility. And that's sort of like where things turned around for us and we were no longer, profitable. So, and this is what I'm grappling with, the amount of money that we're talking about here spending over the next 10 years. So if we spent $2 million, expensed it over 20 years, and it just about crippled us, how are we going to be able to, expend these expenses over the next 10 years and stay competitive with rates?
Paul or Trent, you want to take that?
Well, I guess what I can put in there is in the financial analysis, we did reflect that $15 million capital expenditure. And, we did estimate it as best as we could what the rates were going to be under that scenario, and then did a comparison with NSPI under very conservative assumptions. And it shows that you're still going to be underneath NSPI. But again, it's largely because of the structural differences between the two utilities, i.e. the higher density and then being tax exempt.
Okay. Councillor Halverson.
Is this what it's like for the rest of you following me when I ask questions? Along the lines of what the deputy mayor was asking, and this may not be a question for you folks, this might actually be for staff, but when we're talking about $15 million in spending over 10 years, you talk about a $3.2 million net asset base with only $500,000 in debt, and you said there's borrowing available. Like even quick math here, that's not going to come close to what we're going to need. And actually, I would maybe put it to staff, what kind of capacity would we actually have to get any borrowing on that asset value?
Through the chair to Councillor Halverson, it's a very good question, but it's not an analysis we have complete yet as we're working through our budget process. And as you know, our finance director runs the electric utility, and she's, of course, unfortunately been out for quite some time. So there are things we're working through, but we would endeavor to have that information for you when we bring the options forward for decision.
Appreciate that. And again, along the lines of what the deputy mayor was asking, there's a lot of everything in here deals with projections 20 years out, and I appreciate that. You've cited several examples, several in Ontario, some down here in Nova Scotia, and you talked about what my concern is the ratepayer. At the end of the day, they're the ones who have to foot the bill. And do you have examples, and this may be outside the scope, but do you have examples of some of these municipalities who have sold and have those ratepayers, once the municipal utility was sold, have the ratepayers seen an increase over what they were projecting to pay? Have they been in line, or are they paying less going with a new, larger provider?
Okay, I'll take that one. I don't know what you know about the industry structure in Ontario, but the big utility is called Hydro One Networks. It serves service territory widely across the province, of which a large component is rural. And when our industry first restructured, and I guess basically the municipalities for the first time had the option to negotiate sales out of 300 municipal utilities in Ontario, 89 sold to Hydro One in the first couple of years. And all of them got huge rate increases because Hydro One's cost base is much higher than it is for a small municipal utility, primarily because they're a rural system, but also just because they're big. They have many layers of management. They had many departments and functions that a smaller utility just doesn't become involved in. So I guess looking back to some of them that we first worked with that were kind of cottage country municipalities, they, after the period of time that was agreed on the sale, they were moved up to the level of rates that other customers of Hydro One paid, and they were large increases. Nowadays, if a small utility that has survived on its own were to sell, the big determinant is who is the buyer, because the small utility won't be big enough to influence the cost structure of the big one. So if they sell to somebody whose rates are now lower, chances are they'll get a reduction. If they sell to somebody whose rates are now higher, they will, after a couple of years, get an increase.
So
just if I could go on one small step, a lot of the consolidation in Ontario has been through mergers. And when mergers happen between relative equals, they have it all planned out in advance where the cost savings will come from in working together, and they support the merger through calculations of the rate reductions that they expect to achieve.
I was just going to add, in line with what you were saying, Paul, is that typically the acquiring utility, while in some cases they will offer to maintain separate rates for the acquired utility for a period of time, they don't want to do that long term. It's more work. They want to harmonize those rates in with the main utility and not have to file separate rate cases and et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a matter of time before all those rates are going to be harmonized.
Thank you. If I can indulge you in one more question, and this may not, again, be your pure purview here, but you said $15 million investment over 10 years. How much and how quickly do we need to make that investment? Are we talking, 10 million up in the first 2 years? Are we talking 3 million over every 3 years? What are we talking here?
I'm coming off the top of my head, but my recollection is there was spending over the entire 10-year period, but some of it was front-end loaded. And I'm going to say maybe in the first, and again, I don't have it right in front of me, but I'd say the 3 to 7 years, 3 to 7 was where the bulk of the expenses were. And Darren, maybe you can, if your memory's better than mine, maybe you can recall on that too.
Yeah, I think you're right. There was kind of a hump in I believe it was years 2 to 5 or something, then it kind of settled off. At the end, it was just the main portion of it was to get those first group of feeders converted from 5.33 kV to 12 kV, and in order to do that, there was some major enhancements that had to be done at the substation level that to get it over that hump. And then, there's mitigation issues that can be done along the median time, buying common equipment, by even now starting out. There's equipment that can be purchased that would allow the easier transition when the conversions do happen. And that's something that can be shared with the town. I think we did that with the town when we had some communications early on. So I think it's in the full report.
Yeah, I'll have a dig through again. Yeah, thank you.
All right. I'm next, then Councillor Sanford. First of all, I want to thank you for your thorough report and particularly for the emphasis on density reducing costs. Everyone who has argued with me around this table will know that's been a mantra of mine for as long as I've been on council. So it's always nice to have that reaffirmed. In terms of my question, I think fundamentally what we're grappling here with is a time crunch. And I'm trying to weigh whether or not we've crested the wave of whether this business model or this utility is viable. And I'm weighing that with the capital outlay versus the risk level. So I got a couple of questions related to that. First of all, your 15 million base costs over 10 years. I'm wondering if what's the life cycle of that on the go forward for us to, because that's going to be funded in a, with some sort of mixture of rate increases and debt and efficiencies and other resources. So I'm wondering, what's the payoff period versus the life cycle of that in your estimation?
Trent, did you look at that?
And not specifically, and I'm struggling with how to answer that. But I guess that to me, the bigger question is, I mean, it's kind of a two-headed monster, because if you want to spend the money, you first off have to get approval by the regulator. And once you've got approval, that allows you to recover those costs and earn a return on those investments. So that's all good. But the other side of it is that also impacts rates for customers. And obviously, I'm assuming you're going to want to keep rates as low as you possibly can. So in effect, it becomes a bit of a balancing act. And I don't know what else to add to that at this point.
Yeah, what I'm really trying to figure out is there's a risk pooling element in a larger utility, even though, you know, there's a rate lowering element in a smaller utility with a denser customer base. So what I'm really trying to weigh in the balance or get your take on is, you know, what's the risk level with not amortizing those costs over a larger customer base, you know, whatever utility would be the purchaser.
I'll let Darren jump in on this, but to me, this is not rocket science. This is known technology. This is known engineering. It should be, I don't want to use the word straightforward because it's never straightforward, but I see it as being very manageable, is my perspective. But Darren, please chime in.
Yeah, no, I do, you know, and even just the modernization of some of the equipment that would be used in the outlaid in the capital plan. It's common infrastructure, common material that's used. Managing that budget, I don't see that being an issue either. Going through, you know, moving on the way things are executed. Other utilities manage those projects, and they become successful. And it's just helping out the town and helping with your staff to ensure that, you know, that the numbers and the money's being put in the right place. That's key.
And Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, but I see getting rid of that non-standard voltage part of the system is going to eliminate risks or reduce risks that you're currently exposed to.
Well, for sure, because some of if presently, Nova Scotia Power would have limited stock of that specialty equipment. And if something happened, there could be issues where they cannot get the replacement parts for that. Whereas the standard equipment, in my previous experience today, I've worked with utilities who want to get common equipment. They can't get it, but they call utility A, and that utility shares that equipment with them and they replace it. So it's quite common equipment that's used throughout the utility in North America, especially in Canada, all across Canada. That's a standard voltage across the board. And it's stockable equipment, and vendors have some of that equipment on shelf. I guess since COVID, there has been some issues on, you know, just-in-time deliveries, but when you get on the list of vendor preference, you're in line to receive the equipment when you need to. So we can provide you some information if needed be on that. You know, it's in the report, and it was in the previous reports that were some of the other engineering firms who did some studies for the town. It's listed in there also. And just to let you know, I went back and just looked at that report. It's a little bit front end loaded on that capital plan. Then it levels out in the future years. So.
Thank you. And yeah, the question I appreciate is more financial than technological and risk-based, more than, you know, whether there's supply chain issues. It's really an issue of the fact that we've allowed, you know, decades worth of accumulated deferred maintenance to exist in the utility, and had we been bearing these costs over a more sustained period, we'd probably be in a better position now than we find ourselves in. So I just wanted to get your take on the risk level there. And just to confirm what the deputy mayor said, on one hand, that doesn't include operating costs that may result from, reestablishing our own work crew. And we've also looked at a few renewable energy generation projects. I think it was about 3 million. I'm looking at the town engineer for the solar garden and the dump. Was that the initial?
Yeah, now with those renewable options, and I'm sure the town has looked into that, there is a substantial amount of funding available from the federal government and that they just announced recently. We've been involved with several projects and helping municipalities obtain that funding. We're working right now with Edmondson Energy up in Northern New Brunswick on a similar project for a solar and a battery. And they were able to obtain funding from provincial funding, which makes those projects more feasible. Otherwise, try to do them on their own. Sometimes they can't, they're not sustainable without funding in these times today. So.
No, and we've had those assessments and we're just waiting on decisions related to the electric utility to determine whether to action them. What I'm trying to figure, I'm trying to weigh that's 18 million then that we maybe are potentially at, and a ratepayer base of 2,284. So it's the smallness of the ratepayer base versus the largeness of the costs that are generating my questions, and the time frame in which those costs have to be borne, and whether they're viable for that small ratepayer base and our citizens.
Yeah, correct.
I've got Councillor Sam.
If I could just maybe throw something in, these are assets for the most part, except for maybe a vehicle or computer equipment on the distribution system. They're about a 40-year life. So you're not averaging over large service territory, but you are averaging over time. And a robust system should continue to serve for many years. Lenders are typically very happy to lend money to a regulated monopoly, which is, if they're in the least prudent, virtually guaranteed recovery of costs. So that should work well, and then those costs are amortized over that long period in terms of recovery from customers.
Thank you for that, Paula. I have Councillor Sanford next.
Through the chair to Deputy Mayor Mosier. So
sorry, Councillor Sanford, we're not debating the issue. So if you have a question about the history.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Is it okay to ask that? Okay. So I'm just hoping you can help me to understand what was behind the decision when we moved from having our own staff to contracting with Nova Scotia Power. Thank you.
And staff can back me up here if I run off the rail, but it was largely due that we couldn't retain attract and retain the skill set that we needed. After Raymond retired, we had a replacement for a short time, and that person didn't work out. And then we lost one of our linesmen and we couldn't replace them. So it was just, traction and retention.
Any further questions of council at this stage? Nope, seeing none. All right, thank you for your report. I'm sure this will be a long conversation, and we'll look forward to, I think the next phase will be to receive a staff report at a future meeting. Okay.
Again, I'd like to thank your worship, members of council and the public for allowing us to present, and looking forward to hopefully working further with the town of Lunenburg and in a solution at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, that takes us on to the contract award for the skate park capital project. I don't know if there's a staff report that anybody wishes to present on this. I'm seeing the Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Your Worship. For the public record, my name's Arthur McDonald, and
I'm the Director of Community Development. In the approved 2023-24 capital budget, the following project was approved: to enhance the Lunenburg Skate Park to address mobility issues, safety, and accessibility. Project highlights will include repairs and maintenance to the surface of the park, remove asphalt and replace with concrete, adding an accessible walkway to the park from the parking area, installing a gazebo to protect users from sun and rain, and to add additional concrete elements to the park expansion. A portion of the project was completed in 2022-23. This was the addition of lighting surrounding the facility. The remaining work will be completed in early spring 2023 as a private donation enhanced the original scope of work. A request for proposals was issued in August of 2022 with one submission by Propor Concrete Services, Inc. The total submission price was $121,293 plus HST. A tender with a total value of over $100,000 requires approval of Town Council, and staff has a motion for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Any questions of Arthur at this stage? Councillor Halverson?
Just if I remember correctly, that there was that donation was quite significant. It almost covered a lot of the cost, didn't it not?
For your worship, I do have a breakdown. We currently have donations in the amount of $20,000. We receive federal and provincial monies in the amount of $18,500, and the remaining amount, estimated to be $126,000, will be provided through a private donor. Thank you.
Okay. There's a motion for council's consideration, and moving the motion, Councillor Owens. Seconded by Councillor Sanford. Any discussion or debate? Real tough to spend free money. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. And we thank the donor. That takes us on to item 9.4, the Nova Scotia Strong Award nomination. If there's a staff report related to that, I will turn it over to staff to present that report.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Provincial Nova Scotia Strong Award recognizes individuals or groups who come together to demonstrate resilience in community during a time or events when people face tragedy and or struggles. The deadline for nominations is May 23rd, 2023. The Berg Classic is an annual volunteer-run local community-based recreational hockey tournament and social event that creates an entertaining weekend in Lunenburg. The purpose and goal of the event is to raise funds to be donated within the community to individuals and causes who require it the most. Each year, 100% of the proceeds are returned to the local community. The 2023 event marks the 10th year anniversary of the fundraising. So therefore, staff has a recommendation for council to nominate the Berg Classic Community Fundraising Event for the Nova Scotia Strong Award. And that is our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur. Any questions at this stage? Remarkably worthy event. I think we all agree. I will open the floor if anybody would like to move and second the staff motion as circulated. Moved by Councillor Ernst, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. That takes us on to item 9.5, workplace harassment prevention policy. We are simply giving notice of this policy as required under the MGA, which requires 7 days notice, that the policy be considered at our May 9th, 2023 regular meeting. We can have the staff report at that meeting. Right now, I'll just look for the notice if there's somebody who would like to move and second that. Moved by Councillor Halverson, seconded by Councillor Bertels. Any discussion or debate? Seeing none, all those in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Sanford, probably on a question.
I'm just wondering if, when I was looking at the draft, if there's some missing part to it. And I'm thinking about the context of using social media, which is near and dear right now, I think, to everybody. So I just didn't necessarily see within the policy that it speaks to the use of social media or ways in which social media is used that could disparage, say, the town of Lunenburg or coworkers or council. And I'm wondering, you know, when we talk about how people conduct themselves, whether they're employees or council members, if there's something that we should have in that policy that speaks to not doing harm to the standing of the town or staff or council.
So I think that's best left for the 9th when the policy would be deliberated.
Okay, sure.
We're just giving notice now.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. And now I need a motion to meet in camera pursuant to section 22(2) of the Municipal Government Act, moved by the Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councillor Halverson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. And with council's unanimous consent, we will take a recess and resume at 7:50 p.m. All right, we are coming out of in camera. We will take a motion to come out of camera by unanimous consent. We have one motion to rise and report, which is the extension of the closing date of the sale of 17 Tannery Road. Motion was passed in camera, has been recorded by the clerk. Can I just get a motion to approve that in public session? Moved by Councillor Sanford, seconded by Councillor Halverson. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried, and there being no further business, we stand adjourned.